literally just every month, like he'd get his check and go straight to the casino, gamble his ass off, and then by like the 15th or the 16th.
Few would have guessed that behind the smiles and multi-million-dollar deals on the show Pawn Stars, Rick Harrison, the iconic face of America's pawn industry, has endured heartbreaking tragedies in real life. When the stage lights dim, Rick faces not only the greatest loss of his life, but also family disputes that have left the public stunned. From being a beloved reality TV mogul admired by millions, Rick Harrison's life has taken an unexpected turn filled with tears and surprises. What truly happened to the soul of Pawn Stars? And why has this tragedy shaken the entire nation? When audiences think of Rick Harrison, most immediately picture the shrewd, sharp-witted negotiator behind the counter of the gold and silver pawn shop, the man who turned haggling into must-watch television. But long before the fame, the fortune, and the cameras of Pawn Stars, Harrison's story began in a place far less glamorous, marked not by deals and treasures, but by illness, hardship, and a resilience that would quietly shape his future. Born in 1965, Harrison grew up in the shadows of challenges most children could hardly imagine. As a boy, he was diagnosed with epilepsy, a condition that disrupted the rhythms of a normal childhood. While his peers ran through neighborhood streets, played sports, and traded secrets in schoolyards, Rick often found himself confined to bed, his world limited by seizures and recovery. Yet, in that stillness, something extraordinary happened. Instead of succumbing to frustration, he sought refuge in the boundless pages of books. History and science became his companions, feeding a growing curiosity about the way the world worked. In hindsight, it was here, in those solitary hours, that Harrison developed the hunger for knowledge and the instinct for observation that would later make him a master of evaluating artifacts, antiques, and people alike. By the time he reached his teenage years, the realities of life demanded a different kind of education. Harrison left school early, not because of lack of intelligence or ambition, but because his family's financial situation required another pair of working hands. In 1981, after a string of failed business attempts left his father struggling to keep the family afloat, the Harrisons packed up and moved to Las Vegas, a city of endless possibility, but also of unforgiving competition. For Rick, it was a defining moment. The move wasn't just geographical. It represented the beginning of a journey that would test his perseverance and sharpen his instincts for survival. Las Vegas in the early 1980s was a paradox. Beneath the neon lights and casino glamour was a harsh desert city that rewarded hustle and punished hesitation. For a young man who had already learned how to adapt to life's setbacks, the environment was both intimidating and oddly familiar. Harrison absorbed its lessons quickly. Opportunity often hid behind hardship, and resilience was the currency that mattered most. The real turning point came in 1989. Together with his father, Richard the Old Man Harrison, Rick co-founded the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop on Las Vegas Boulevard. At first glance, it was just another pawn shop among dozens in the city. But Rick's vision stretched far beyond short-term loans and secondhand sales. He understood people as much as he understood objects, and he recognized the stories behind every item that crossed the counter. That combination, business acumen grounded in human connection, would become the signature ingredient in what later evolved into one of television's most unexpected empires. What began as a family business would eventually grow into Pawn Stars, a cultural phenomenon that introduced millions of viewers to the quirky, unpredictable, and surprisingly educational world of pawnbroking. But the roots of this success trace back not to the television cameras, but to the bedridden boy who once turned to books to escape the limits of illness. Rick Harrison's childhood struggles weren't obstacles that held him back. They were the forge that created the resilience, intellect, and determination that propelled him forward. By the late 2000s, Rick Harrison had already spent 2 decades immersed in the world of pawnbroking. The Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, founded with his father, had become a modestly successful business in Las Vegas. Locals knew it as a place where you could pawn a guitar for rent money, buy a bargain-priced watch, or stumble upon a collectible that looked like it belonged in a museum. But few could have predicted that this humble storefront would soon become the stage for one of the most recognizable shows in reality television history. In 2009, Harrison's life took a dramatic turn when the History Channel debuted Pawn Stars. The concept seemed deceptively simple. Follow Rick, his father, the old man, his son Corey, and family friend Chumley as they appraised, bargained, and joked their way through daily business at the pawn shop. Yet, the formula worked like magic. The show offered more than quirky characters and funny exchanges. It blended entertainment with education, giving viewers a crash course in history every time an unusual artifact came through the door. One night, it might be a Civil War rifle, another day a vintage jukebox, or even a document signed by a U.S. president. Audiences weren't just watching transactions. They were learning, laughing, and without even realizing it, connecting with history through Rick's encyclopedic curiosity. For Harrison, the sudden spotlight was both exhilarating and surreal. Imagine spending decades behind the counter of a pawn shop, negotiating with everyday customers, and then, almost overnight, finding yourself recognized in airports, restaurants, and on streets halfway around the world. In interviews, he has often admitted that he never expected fame. "I just wanted to run a good business," he once reflected. But television gave him something far bigger. A platform that transformed him into a cultural ambassador of sorts. A man who made pawnbroking not only respectable, but fascinating. As Pawn Stars skyrocketed in popularity, so too did the gold and silver pawn shop. No longer just a stop for locals, it became a tourist destination in Las Vegas. Crowds lined up outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of Rick or Chumley, and perhaps even witness the negotiation of a rare treasure. On some days, the line wrapped around the block, a surreal sight for a family business that once worried about keeping the lights on. The shop itself evolved into part pawn store, part museum, and part tourist attraction. But Harrison wasn't content to remain simply a television personality. Seizing the momentum, he expanded his personal brand. In 2011, he released his memoir, License to Pawn: Deals, Steals, and My Life at the Gold and Silver. The book offered fans a candid glimpse into his struggles, triumphs, and the lessons he learned on the unpredictable road to success. Critics praised it for being both brutally honest and surprisingly inspirational. It revealed, once again, that behind the sharp businessman was someone who had fought through illness, poverty, and self-doubt to arrive where he was. Harrison also ventured into other avenues: guest appearances on talk shows, endorsements, and even game show cameos. There were rumors, perhaps exaggerated, perhaps not, that Hollywood producers flirted with the idea of developing scripted projects around him, intrigued by his blend of street-smart charisma and everyman appeal. While those projects never quite materialized, they underscored just how firmly Harrison had embedded himself into the fabric of American pop culture. What made him such a compelling figure wasn't just the show's success, but the way he seemed to embody a distinctly American narrative: the self-made man who turned hardship into opportunity. Viewers could sense the authenticity in his story. He wasn't a manufactured celebrity. He was, quite literally, a man who built his fortune one negotiation at a time, who could appraise a centuries-old coin while still cracking a dry joke about Chumley's latest misadventure. Of course, fame brought its own set of challenges. Some critics dismissed reality television as shallow, questioning whether Pawn Stars romanticized the pawnbroking industry. Others speculated about tensions within the Harrison family, wondering if the pressures of television might fracture their bond. If Rick Harrison's professional life reads like a masterclass in resilience and reinvention, his personal life has been equally dramatic. At times joyous, at times heartbreaking, and always unpredictable. Much like the rare artifacts that pass through the counters of the gold and silver pawn shop, Harrison's relationships have carried with them their own histories, values, and, inevitably, complications. His first marriage to Kim was the beginning of his life as a family man. Together, they had 2 sons, Corey and Adam, both of whom would go on to play their own roles in the family story. Corey, of course, became a familiar face on Pawn Stars, often portrayed as the heir apparent to Rick's pawnbroking empire. Adam, on the other hand, chose a quieter path, stepping away from the limelight and pursuing his own interests outside of the family business. But as in so many American families, the weight of financial strain and the stresses of young marriage eventually proved too heavy. The couple divorced, leaving Harrison with the dual responsibilities of running a business and raising his sons. Not long after, Rick sought stability once again, marrying Tracy. Their union brought him his third son, Jake. For a time, the family of 5 seemed settled, balancing the chaos of pawn shop life with the ordinary rituals of suburban living. Yet the demands of business, the pressures of growing fame, and the complexities of blended families created cracks that could not be patched. By the time Pawn Stars had catapulted Harrison into celebrity status, his second marriage had also ended. Then came a chapter that seemed, at least for a while, like it might be a fairy tale. In 2012, Rick proposed to Deanna Burdett, a legal secretary, who, like him, knew the sting of divorce. Twice, in fact. Their engagement captured media attention, not least because it seemed to represent a new start for a man whose personal life often mirrored the volatility of his professional world. The wedding, held in 2013 at Laguna Beach, was a spectacle that blended Hollywood flair with down-to-earth charm. Guests included not only family, but also his Pawn Stars co-stars, cementing the sense that the show had become an extension of the Harrison family itself. Through Deanna, Rick also embraced the role of stepfather to 3 daughters, and for a time it appeared that this new family structure might offer the stability he had long sought. Yet life, as Harrison often says when appraising items in the shop, doesn't always deliver what you expect. By 2020, the marriage unraveled, and the couple quietly went their separate ways. Still, Rick is not the kind of man to give up easily, whether in business or in love. In 2021, he married Amanda Palmer, a union that from the outside looked promising. Friends close to the couple suggested that Amanda shared Rick's love of adventure and travel, often accompanying him on spontaneous trips that offered him a break from the constant grind of television and pawnbroking. For 2 years, they seemed inseparable, posting snapshots of dinners, vacations, and family gatherings. Yet beneath the surface, familiar tensions returned. By 2023, the marriage had dissolved, leaving Harrison once again facing the challenges of rebuilding his personal life. And then came the surprise twist that only Rick Harrison's life could deliver. In March of 2025, just when fans assumed he might swear off marriage altogether, news broke that he was engaged once more. This time to Angie Polushkin, a woman largely unknown to the public. The announcement caught many off guard, not least because Harrison had seemed, at least in recent interviews, weary of the public scrutiny surrounding his personal affairs. Some fans speculated that Angie represented a new chapter, someone outside the glare of television who might bring him the grounded happiness he had long been searching for. What is certain is that Harrison's marital journey reflects the same qualities that define his career: persistence, optimism, and a willingness to take risks. Just as he appraises every item that enters his pawn shop with a careful mix of skepticism and hope, so too has he approached love. Always aware of the pitfalls, but never unwilling to try again. To outsiders, the series of marriages and divorces might seem like a string of failures. But for Harrison, each relationship has added to the story of his life, shaping him as both a father and a partner. In interviews, he has occasionally hinted that his marriages, successful or not, taught him lessons about trust, patience, and the importance of balancing work with intimacy. And if history is any guide, Rick Harrison is not a man defined by his setbacks, but by his ability to keep moving forward. For all the success and celebrity that Pawn Stars brought him, Rick Harrison's life has also been shadowed by tragedies that would test even the strongest of men. His story is not one of uninterrupted triumph. Rather, it is a reminder that even those who appear untouchable beneath the glare of television lights carry wounds that never quite heal. The first devastating blow came in 2018, when Richard "the Old Man" Harrison passed away at the age of 77. For Rick, this was more than the loss of a parent. It was the loss of a business partner, a mentor, and the cornerstone of the Harrison family. The Old Man wasn't just beloved by viewers for his sharp wit and no-nonsense demeanor. He was the backbone of the gold and silver pawn shop, the steady hand that guided Rick through decades of uncertainty. In interviews, Rick admitted that walking into the shop without his father felt like stepping into a different world. Some days he would catch himself turning to the old office, half expecting to hear his father's dry humor cutting through the silence. Fans, too, mourned deeply, sending letters, flowers, and tributes that lined the shop's entrance for weeks. Then came 2020, a year that tested nearly everyone, but perhaps none more harshly than those whose livelihoods depended on face-to-face interaction. When the COVID-19 pandemic shut down Las Vegas, the pawn shop fell eerily quiet. The bustling lines of tourists vanished, and with them, the heartbeat of the business. Profits plummeted, and Rick was forced to make painful decisions, reducing staff, cutting hours, and negotiating with creditors just to keep the lights on. For a man who had built his empire through relentless hustle, the silence of those empty aisles was a bitter reminder of how fragile success could be. At the same time, Harrison's personal life was unraveling. Multiple divorces in quick succession left him emotionally drained and constantly in the headlines. The man known for his quick wit on screen now found himself struggling to smile in private. Worse still, a bitter legal dispute erupted between him and his own mother, who contested aspects of the family's estate after Richard Harrison's death. Court documents revealed tensions that had long simmered beneath the surface, and suddenly the Harrison family, once portrayed as a tight-knit clan on television, was thrust into a very public feud. For Rick, it was a particularly painful chapter. The pawn shop had always been about family, but now family had become a source of division. But nothing could prepare him for January 2024. News broke that Adam Harrison, Rick's second son, had died at the age of 39 from a drug overdose. The announcement stunned fans around the world and cast a pall over the Harrison family. Adam, who had largely stayed out of the limelight, was known by those close to him as intelligent, kind-hearted, and fiercely independent. His death was not only a private tragedy, but a public reckoning with the harsh realities of addiction. Rick's grief was palpable. Friends described him as a man hollowed out, struggling to reconcile the relentless demands of fame with the immeasurable weight of personal loss. In a hypothetical twist that some close to him suggested, Rick began spending more time away from the cameras, retreating into quiet spaces where he could reflect, grieve, and find strength. He reportedly took late-night walks through the desert outside Las Vegas, seeking solace in the silence of the Nevada sky. Some even claimed he had considered stepping away from Pawn Stars altogether, questioning whether the show still had meaning in the face of such loss. Yet, as he has done throughout his life, Harrison found a way to keep moving forward. Rather than hiding his pain, he began to speak candidly about Adam's passing, using his platform to raise awareness about addiction and the dangers of substance abuse. In one emotional interview, he admitted that no amount of fame or money could fill the void left by a child. His words resonated with fans who had faced similar struggles, and for the first time, Rick's vulnerability became as powerful as his business acumen. Tragedy, however, did not end there. Rumors swirled that the pawn shop, once the crown jewel of his career, was facing mounting pressures from online competitors, rising rents, and the changing economy of Las Vegas. Though not all of these challenges were confirmed, the whispers added to the sense that Rick was a man fighting battles on all fronts: professional, personal, and emotional. And yet, perhaps this is what makes his story so compelling. Rick Harrison has never claimed perfection. His life, like the items in his shop, is a blend of flaws, scars, and undeniable value. For every rare coin or signed guitar that crossed his counter, he understood one truth: history leaves marks, and those marks tell a story. His own life is no different. The death of a father, the collapse of marriages, the sting of lawsuits, the silence of a business brought to its knees, and the unbearable grief of losing a son. These are not the tales of television entertainment. They are the raw, unpolished realities that shape a man's soul. And behind the reality TV fame, Rick Harrison is, at his core, a man shaped as much by pain as by perseverance. For decades, Rick Harrison has been a familiar face to millions, a man who could make you laugh with a sarcastic remark, intrigue you with a history lesson, and impress you with his uncanny ability to spot value where others saw only junk. Yet, as the years unfolded, his life revealed itself to be far more than television could capture. It became a saga of triumph and tragedy, resilience and vulnerability, loss, and renewal. After the devastating blows of losing his father and his son, Rick stood at a crossroads. Some whispered that he might finally step away from the show, hand the reins fully to Corey, and retreat into the privacy he had been denied for so long. Others imagined him selling the gold and silver pawn shop, closing the chapter on a business that had both made him and cost him so much. But Rick, ever the fighter, chose a different path. Instead of surrendering, he leaned into the very qualities that had carried him through every stage of his journey: persistence, curiosity, and an unshakable belief that even in the darkest corners, something valuable can be found. In 2025, just months after announcing his engagement to Angie Polushkin, Rick made a symbolic gesture. He personally reopened the pawn shop's refurbished front doors after a lengthy renovation. For fans who had traveled from around the world to see the store, it was more than a business update. It was a moment of reassurance that Rick Harrison was still standing, still working, still present. Some even speculated that he was considering a spin-off project, one that would focus less on the shop itself and more on the hidden stories of the people and artifacts that shaped America. Whether rumor or reality, the idea underscored the enduring fascination people had with Rick's ability to turn everyday objects and everyday struggles into something meaningful. What makes his story so compelling is not simply that he has endured, but how he has endured. For every tragedy, he has found a way to continue forward. For every heartbreak, he has discovered a new purpose. Fans often say that Rick's life mirrors the lessons of pawnbroking itself. Value is rarely obvious at first glance. It must be uncovered, preserved, and sometimes restored through patience and perseverance. And so, as Rick Harrison continues to appear on television screens, negotiate deals, and greet fans at his shop, he stands as both an entertainer and an emblem of human resilience. His life reminds us that behind every public persona lies a private battle. Behind every bright stage, light lies a shadow. If Rick's story has moved you, if you want to explore more of the hidden truths behind the glitz and glamour of celebrity lives, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Here, we'll keep uncovering the stories that prove fame is never as simple as it seems, and that behind every star, there's a story worth telling.